Right, so today we're going to be talking about direct and indirect speech, and I'm going to try to make it an enjoyable experience, hopefully. And also, in this lesson, you are going to learn what you need to know for the rest of your schooling career. All right, so with regards to direct and indirect speech, what is that exactly? So if I were to relate what someone else said to me, all right, so if John told me that, it is a sunny day today, and I went to go tell my friend what John said, right? Then I could use two ways of relating what John said to my friend, right? So the first way I could use is something called direct speech. I could quote exactly what John is saying to my friend, all right? So when I'm quoting exactly what John says, I'm using direct speech because I'm not changing anything that he said. So I'm going to say, John said it is, and exactly what he said. All right. I think I said it is a hot day today. I can't remember what I said. Anyway, but if I were to relate what John said, right, in reported speech or indirect speech, I would not be saying exactly what he said. I would be changing the tense of that sentence. All right. So, for example, John says at the bottom here, let's look at the example. So John is telling Susie, I won the soccer match, right? And Susie wants to relate what John says to her friend. Then if she were to use indirect speech or reported speech, she would say, John said that he won the soccer match. That would be indirect speech. But if Susie wants to use direct speech, right? She wants to say exactly what John said word for word, she would be using direct speech. And this is how she would say it. John said, right, I won the soccer match. Can you see how in this example, Susie is not changing anything that John is saying? She's saying exactly what he says. Moving on. Another example would be a teacher tells a student, don't you come in school, right? Then the student goes back and relates what the teacher said to her father. She says, my teacher told me not to chew gum in school. Is that direct or indirect speech? That is an example of indirect speech, because can you see how the student is changing the way in which her teacher said to her not to chew gum. All right, so she's not saying exactly what the teacher said. She's relating what the teacher said. Okay, if she has to say exactly how the teacher said it, she would say, my teacher told me, right, do not chew gum in school. Right, and don't forget the exclamation mark as well, so everything stays the same. And how do we know that this is exactly what the teacher said? We look at the inverted commas or the quotation marks over here. All right. Okay, moving on. So let's look at an example of where we change from direct to indirect speech. So if indirect speech, Jason says to Ellie, I will call you tomorrow, we need to change it to indirect speech. All right. So there are a few rules we need to follow when we're making this change. The first thing we need to realize, right, is we need to look for the main action verb here. Okay, and we look for the main action verb, and we don't call it an action verb, we call it an introductory verb. It's introducing what this person is going to say, what he's going to do, by telling you how he does this, right? So in this sentence here, Jason said to Ellie, can we see that the introductory verb, introductory means the beginning or the start of something, is said, all right? All the verbs within the quotation marks, those are like finite verbs, main verbs, etc. But the verb that comes outside of the introductory of the quotation marks, right, is called the introductory verb, because it's telling you what the action, what the subject is doing, right? So once we identify the introductory verb, and here you can see that I have highlighted it, that will give you the clue to what the tense should be for the indirect speech. Okay, so if you remember, there are three tenses: past tense, present tense, and future tense. Because the tense of the introductory verb in this sentence here is past, all right, then the indirect speech will also be in past tense. Everything needs to change to the past tense. For example, the words will and the words tomorrow will change to the past tense when we are changing it into indirect speech. So another important thing I want to bring to your attention is whenever we see the words tomorrow, today, last week, etc., when we're changing it to indirect speech and we're changing the tense of the sentence, those words follow specific rules. Okay, so let's see some of those rules here. Today changes to that day, tomorrow changes to the next day or the following day. Yesterday changes to the previous day or the day before. Next week changes to the following week. Last week changes to the week before or the previous week. Now changes to then. This changes to that. Here changes to there, right? So bearing that in mind, we are going to change sentences, and whenever we see those words and we need to change it into the past tense, we will do so. So when I relate Jason said to Ali, I will call you tomorrow, into indirect speech, it becomes Jason said to Ali that he would call her the next day. Can you see how will changes to would and tomorrow changes to the next day? Can you also see that there are no quotation marks in the reported speech? Let's do a few examples so that you guys can really get to understand this better. The first one, he said she always wears a coat. So the first rule you need to ask yourself is, what is the tense of the sentence? When I'm changing the direct speech to indirect speech, how do I identify the tense, right? So I identify it by looking at my introductory verb, which in this sentence is said. Okay, so that means that everything in the indirect speech must be in the past tense. So for example, he said that. You don't have to use that. That is optional. Okay, that's why I'm putting it in brackets. He always wears a coat. All right. The next one. The next sentence says, she complained, I am always looking for my keys. In this sentence, the same rule applies. We ask ourselves, what is the introductory verb? And we see that the introductory verb is complained. And complained is in the past tense. So when I'm changing it to indirect speech, everything needs to change to the past tense. So she complained that. You can use the word that, or you don't have to, right? That she, the pronoun I changes to she, and am changes to was, right? She was always looking for. The pronoun my changes to her keys. Understood? Moving on. He said, I am lost. Ask yourself, what is the introductory verb in this sentence? It is said, and said is in the past. He said that he, the pronoun I, changes to he, Am changes to was, lost. Moving on. I've lost my dog, exclaimed the child. What is the introductory verb in this sentence? It is the word exclaimed, and exclaimed is in the past tense. So we start with the child exclaimed that he or she had lost his or her dog, right? We don't know the gender of the child. Moving on. She announced, I am going to the coast next week. So, guys, in this case, y'all, we ask ourselves, the introductory verb is announced, right? And the tense would be past tense as well. So everything else changes to the past tense. And we know that am changes to was, next week changes to the following week, right? So she announced that she was going to the coast the following week. Pretty simple. Moving on. Now, I'm going to make it a little bit tricky for you guys, right? I'm going to make the introductory verb present. So, says is in present tense. So when I'm changing it to indirect speech, everything needs to stay in the present tense. She says that she has written 3 letters for her friend. Can you see how I changes to he, she? Says stays the same as says, all right? And everything in the sentence is in the present tense. Has written is in the present tense, okay? It doesn't make sense to say I has written. The present tense for when you want to say I, and for it will be have, right? Not has. Moving on. So just say I changed this to past tense. She said. Now everything else changes here into the past tense. Instead of saying that she says, you're going to change it to she said. Instead of saying has written, it would become had written, right? 3 letters for her friend. Moving on. She remarked with joy, my friend gave me a bar of chocolates. Same thing with this. Ask yourself, what is the tense of the sentence when I convert it to indirect speech? We find the tense by looking for the introductory verb, which in this case is remarked. Remarked is in the past tense. So she remarked joyfully. You can say joyfully or with joy. That's fine. That her friend gave her or had given her, you can choose, a bar of chocolates. Cool. If it's she remarks with joy, then that is a present tense sentence, and everything else here will change into the present tense. She remarks joyfully that her friend gave her, friend, ooh, I see I've written the wrong word here. Gave her a bar of chocolates. Right, moving on. He said, I will finish my report in 2 days. This is past tense. So he said that he, and will changes to would because we're changing to the past tense. Finish. My changes to his. Report in 2 days. I can speak English, she commented haughtily. This is also past tense. So she commented haughtily, or she haughtily commented that she, now remember we're changing everything to past tense, so can becomes could, that she could speak English. I must go to the bank and get some money, she says. This is a present tense sentence. So she says that she must, right, go to the bank and get some money, right? You could even say to get some money, that would be fine. Or to get some money, that's fine as well. All right, he said, I have to submit this assignment by 3 p.m. tomorrow. Can you see how we need to change this to the past tense when we are putting it in indirect speech? So he said that he had. Have becomes had, right? To submit, this becomes that. Assignment by 3 p.m. tomorrow becomes the following day or the next day. Right, guys? Wow, she yelled. What a lovely surprise. So, guys, here's another rule that comes into play. Can you see how there is an interjective here? An interjective in English is any word that comes with a lot of emotion and usually ends with an exclamation mark. So an interjective could be like wow, hooray, yippee, ish, oh, etc. All right, ouch. So whenever we are describing an interjective into indirect speech, right, we must make sure that we explain how the person felt when they yelled or when they got hurt, all right? So you would say, she yelled with joy, all right, or with happiness or in content, that it was a lovely surprise. Remember, like these kind of sentences, you need to make sense, right? It needs to make sense when you're changing it into indirect speech. If we said, she yelled with joy, what a lovely surprise, that doesn't make sense. You need to, when you think about when you relate something to someone else, all right? What you relate has to make sense, because you need to refer or give someone a message about what someone else said, sticking to the integrity of that message, right? That means that you don't change the intention or the message of that person's words. Eish, he muttered, I have school tomorrow. So we know in South Africa that the word eish, we use it whenever we feel it's an unfavorable situation, okay, and we don't really like what's happening. So it's also an interjective, so we need to explain how did he feel when knowing that he had school tomorrow. He probably felt annoyed, right? Let's go with annoyed. So he muttered in annoyance, or with annoyance, that he had school tomorrow. Tomorrow changes to the next day, right? Okay, so just remember your tense. Your tense is muttered, so it will be past tense. Okay, everything here changes into the past tense, and it's very important to remember what I said about interjective. The next type of sentence is a question. All right, so here another rule comes to play. Whenever there's a question, when you're relating it into indirect speech, you cannot say exactly, you cannot repeat the question, all right? You need to phrase it differently. So first of all, we look at the first rule. What is the introductory verb? And we know that it is says, and says is present tense, all right? So when something is in the present tense, the sentence stays the same. We don't change anything. So he says to me, what, and whenever it's you in the question, in the indirect speech, we say I, right? What I am doing today. Do you guys see how, if you relate this to someone, if like, for example, Billy tells me, how are you doing today? All right. And I tell someone else what he told me. And I wouldn't say he told me, what are you doing today? I would say he told me, he asked me what I was doing today, right? Or you can even use the word asks or says, because it is a question after all. Next one. David said to me, how are you? Same system. So we look for the introductory verb and we look for the tense, right? Now we know the tense of the sentence is past tense. So David said to me, or David asked me how I was. Right? It doesn't make sense to say David said to me. So let's just stick with David asked me. David asked me how I was. Remember, whenever it's you changes to I. She asked the police officer, did you arrest the man? Okay, so in this kind of situation where there's a yes or no answer, all right? So no, I did not arrest the man, or yes, I did arrest the man. Then we use the words whether or if. Whether or if, right? They basically mean the same thing. So let me show you the two sentences that you can form of indirect speech. So she asked the police officer whether whether he or she, because we don't know the gender of the police officer, right, arrested the man or had arrested the man, right? So that's one case when we use the word whether. And when we're using the word whether, we don't need to use the words whether or not. We just say whether, because whether means if it's yes or if it's no. Okay? Or you can say oops, I'm trying to put this in the middle. She asked the police officer if he or she arrested the man. Can you guys see how I'm using the word if in this regard? All right, it's pretty simple. So you can choose if you want to use the word whether or you want to use the word if. All right, I hope you enjoyed this lesson.